watching the Rashkin Report. I'm your host, Yuri Rashkin, and I'm excited to welcome to this episode of our program Vadim Astrakhan, who is joining us from New Jersey, United States. Vadim, welcome to the program.
Thank you. How do you do?
I'm doing very well. I'm excited to welcome Vadim to this program because he's engaged in a very important project, and that is translating the works and restaging works of, first of all, my favorite Russian and Soviet performer, Vladimir Vysotsky, but also other Russian and Soviet poets as well, musicians as well. He's kind of working on this transferring, building bridges between cultures, which I think is a really neat concept. So, Vadim, welcome to the program. Let's talk about Mr. Vysotsky.
Sure. Ask away.
What made you? Well, I don't know. What made you interested? I can imagine. He's a huge star. Who could you compare Vladimir Vysotsky to? Who could he be similar to among the performers that most audience members may know?
Well, it's a question that I am asked a lot and often. There is no one comparable American singer-songwriter, public figure that would be perfectly analogous to Vysotsky. But if you can take Johnny Cash and combine certain elements of Jim Morrison, Bob Marley, and Tom Waits, you can. That should give you a pretty good idea. As somebody once mentioned, you can compare apples to oranges, but if you're trying to describe an orange to a person who's never seen one, well, you have to get creative, and and an apple is actually a good place to start. So that's how I approach it.
It's an interesting way to look at it. I remember many years ago, my father was trying to bring some Russian Soviet performers to the place where we lived, which was back in Utah. And he was acting as a little impresario, trying to be a part of these concert tours that these people would have around the United States. And he would be asked the same question of who is this performer like? And he would come up with the best analogy he could come up with. But then people would sit there and they would listen to these long songs in Russian. And you can tell me that it sounds that it's Johnny Cash or anyone. But if I can't understand the words and the lyrics, this interest is only going to last so long. And I think what you're doing is very important because you're not just translating their works, but you're actually doing it is with the keeping, how do I say? Well, I guess first of all, they still rhyme. So much Russian Soviet poetry that gets translated into English loses its authentic rhyme because it's really difficult. And you work that out. That's like part of your mission. Why did you decide to undertake this project in the first place?
Well, rhyming is essential part of not just of Vysotsky, but of Russian poetry in general. Russian poetry, pretty much all of it rhymes, and to me, it's an integral part of the flow and the overall effect of the original. So it's pretty much a must. If I were to translate a Russian poet, specifically Vysotsky, he has to rhyme in English. So I do spend a lot of time just working on the rhymes. How did it all start? Well, pretty much when I just immigrated to the United States 30 years ago, I was in high school, and just as I was learning English, I would always think a certain line in Russian, and then I'd have to translate it for myself. How would I say this in English? Be something simple, can I have some tea first? That would originate in my mind in Russian, and I was like, how it's now I need to translate it in English. At the same time, I was very much in love with Vysotsky's works, and as I was playing them on my guitar in Russian, I would just think to myself, okay, so how would I say this in English? And every line that I sang, every word that I spoke, I was thinking, what would it sound like in English? My first translations were, of course, terrible, but as my own English, my command of the English language improved, I kept coming back to those translations and polishing them over and over until um, in the year 2005, I believe, I thought they were finally on a level that I wouldn't be ashamed of actually sitting down and recording them in studio. So I took several stabs at it in different studios. Eventually, I found the person who produced my first album, and I've recorded a total of 4 full-length albums. And at the same time, I discovered something interesting. I thought that as I was recording him, I realized that if I record them the way that Vysotsky performed these songs, as I perform these songs to my friends, just in a simple format of one man, one acoustic guitar, it would not be very interesting to people to hear, because music tastes have changed substantially since the 60s and 70s when Vysotsky was at his peak. And people would probably want to hear something more musically complex. And so I started playing around with arrangements. At first, I was very conservative. I definitely did not know what I was doing, and I was kind of feeling my way around it. But I was kind of getting more and more adventurous, risk-taking, if you will. And on the second album, it was produced by a famous Russian blues guitarist, Yuri Naumov, who's pretty much wrote all new music for all these songs from the beginning. We kept the original vocal melodies, because vocal melodies to me are also integral part of Vysotsky's songs, Vysotsky's art. And those moments I simply did not feel like, I did not think would be possible to change. But the arrangements were changed quite a bit. And then I was basically trying to find this golden balance between keeping things just the way they were 40 years ago, very conservative, and very, I guess, experimental. So I did a lot of experimenting with the sound.
What is the response that you're seeing from the work that you have done? Are people able to connect to these words and these songs?
Overall, the response has been fairly positive, but I have discovered a, I guess, a pretty obvious explanation, that people basically can be divided into 2 large categories. Some people are open to new experiences, and other people are not open to any new experiences. So when people are just open to this new idea of listening to the songs that they've never heard before, and I tell them that, well, I'm about to sing you the songs by a giant of Russian culture and Russian poetry, and I perform them in English. Some of them are actually take interest in it, and they try to see, what is the fuss all about. And some of them get it, and but others don't. I mean, because it's very much unlike what most people have heard. And it's certainly not at all similar to what's being played on most commercial radio. So it basically boils down to one's open-mindedness about new experiences.
Is there a song that you feel like is a good introduction for whatever reason, or it doesn't really matter? You just look at the situation and you look at the audience and try to match that up, or how do you approach?
Well, I try to start with kind of simpler songs, but the 2 that I usually start with, they're both extremely popular in Russian, and if there are Russian people in the audience, usually they are the ones that almost immediately win them over. The songs are in Russian called "Тот, кто раньше с ней был" and "Песня о друге." In English, I call them the one
which
who
I
was with
believe
her.
were some of my favorite songs when I was about 8 or 9, maybe 7 or 6.
Because they're, I mean, they're very straightforward,
They
even
are. They're
though
just
they're
great
actually,
stories. First one is about how there's you trying to reconnect with a woman, and she's telling you to stay. And there's the one who used to be with her, and there's also, and there's a fight in the end. There's a knife fight, and it's exciting. There's like a story in some ways,
yes,
kind of reminding me of, I guess you're right, Johnny Cash and that country vein of like authentic storytelling.
yes. The one who was with her before, I think Johnny Cash could sing without breaking sweat. It's very, the story is very interesting and very, very straightforward. Yes, it's about, a conflict between a man and an ex-boyfriend of a girl that he meets, that he fancies. And the other song is "Песня о друге." I translated as "If Your Friend," simply by the first line, because again, it talks about mountain climbing, but it's very interesting in terms of rhymes and in terms of images. And all Russian people know this song by heart, so it's very easy for them to follow. For a Russian person to hear Vysotsky, it's a huge change. Most of the time, to hear Vysotsky in English, I mean, most of the time, the first natural reaction of Russian people is Vysotsky in English. That's impossible. I will pretty much hear it every time. And if they're willing, and again, this goes to the same idea of people being either open or not open. If they're willing to give my translations a shot and my performances a shot, usually these two songs actually resonate with them very quickly. One interesting experience I had was I performed in Penn State University. I was asked to come there and play, and I've been told that there were a couple of Russians in the faculty that were very much opposed to this unknown young man playing songs by Vysotsky. They said maybe he can come in and just lecture on Vysotsky, maybe he can play some YouTube videos. And I actually had to convince them by email, really, just saying, guys, just let me do my thing, and I'm sure you will not be disappointed. So I come in, I set up, I start playing, and these two ladies walk into the room, sit in the third row, I believe, like this. And as I'm playing, as I'm performing, I'm watching them, and I see their facial expression change from so it was very pleasing. I felt like I won them over towards the end. And because to Russian people, Vysotsky is such a sacred cow, that people really are engaged in a sort of an idol worshiping. Anything that has anything to do with trying to update the legacy of Vysotsky is treated with bayonets. And
It is such an interesting topic in general, the idea of translation and sharing works with different languages, because I think that Russians have a certain level of advantage over English speakers sometimes, because Shakespeare, which is written in, well, barely modern English, is translated into Russian usually in the last 100 years. So it has a really new language. So it allows people to enjoy the plays much more so. And in fact, there's a project now underway in the United States to try to kind of retranslate works of Shakespeare, even though, again, as with Vysotsky, it's canon. You can't go against canon. So it's tough, because how do there has to be a way. Otherwise, these works are limited to either the original audience or to audience of specialists. But these are such great works that they need to be enjoyed and appreciated by all. So what you're doing is so important. Now, Vysotsky has is almost biblical in the sense that he provided a lot of value lessons for his audience, because in Soviet Union there really was no Bible, there was nothing of this sacred text except for Lenin and Stalin and Marx. So people really were looking for others to provide them with actually like educational values, and that's what Vysotsky does. Can you talk a little bit about those things?
First of all, I will agree with the point that you raised about Russian people being at an advantage to respect to Shakespeare because of its more modern translations. In fact, when I was in high school, me and my Russian classmates did a lot better than my American classmates when we studied Shakespeare, simply because we got a hold of Pasternak's translations, and there was no problem understanding the material at all. We didn't have to jump back into the 400-year-long language like
Just
America.
to clarify for people that may not know, Pasternak that Vadim is referring to is Boris Pasternak, author of Dr. Zhivago and a Nobel Prize laureate for literature. Go ahead.
Yes, that's correct. Russian school of translation is pretty much second to none in the world. There is a certain political reason for that. Many talented Russian writers could not express themselves freely due to censorship, be it in Tsarist times or in the Soviet times. So instead of expressing themselves by writing their own works and getting in trouble, they applied their considerable literary talent to translating. And this is why.
And children's literature, which is amazing. But yes,
Yes,
let's stick to
absolutely.
translations.
And this is why English literature, French literature, German literature almost became second nature to Russian kids, just in American literature, of course, because it was all so well translated. Um, as far as I know, in English literature and American literature, there is no comparable situation. People just basically wrote what they wanted to write, and the field of translating was always left to scholars, academics, and it. I guess translated literature did not did not become a part of the English culture as much as translated literature became part of Russian culture. So it's very interesting that you mentioned about sort of modernizing Shakespeare. I would love to look into it, because even though technically Shakespeare is really not all that hard to understand, and I enjoy reading Shakespeare in English as much as I enjoy reading Pasternak's or Lazinski's translations. He's another famous translator of Shakespeare, but it would be interesting to see the updated version. But I always felt in my works, in my translations, that my translations are there to be enjoyed. I didn't want my translations to become lectures on Russian or Soviet culture in the 60s and 70s, or from whatever era I'm taking a poet. I wanted them to be songs or poems just for people to enjoy. You don't have to struggle with the language. You should just be able to enjoy the work. And this is why I deliberately always tried to modernize these works while still trying to preserve, of course, the story, the characters, and the charm of the original, the spirit of the original, if you will, but obviously using language that was not in use in Vysotsky's times or in other poets' times that I translate, other poets like Vladimir Mayakovsky or Alexander Pushkin. Now, to answer your second question about the moral importance of Vysotsky for the Soviets, I think you're absolutely correct. Vysotksky's works became a sort of a moral compass for the Soviet listeners and for the contemporary Russian listeners as well. His characters were so relatable and so bright and so interesting that people started obviously associate they always associated his characters with his own personality, which was not always true. But what's more important is that people started measuring their own actions or their own personas against those standards provided by Vysotsky. I believe that's what you're referring to.
Absolutely. What I think would be relevant and appropriate now is to say a couple of words about Vladimir Vysotsky as his biographical kind of a let's do a little catch up, in a sense that he wrote over 600 songs, and he was also an actor, and he wrote songs for plays that he was in because he was very quickly recognized as an outstanding performer and a poet. And so he as he was acting in a theater in Moscow and also in movies, he would be asked in most instances, except for his one of his most famous parts in the last movie he made before he died. He wrote music and songs for himself all over the place, and therefore he portrays different characters, he portrays different situations. And so it's a little bit of an unfair question of like, is this you? Well, I mean, he's an actor in a play and he's
Exactly.
trying
Exactly.
to tell the story of the character.
Yes, and his stories were so compelling, and he acted them out very, very well. I don't think it would be a stretch to call Vysotsky the best performer, certainly in Russian culture, and possibly the best performer who ever lived. He was so convincing in his deliveries, sometimes over the top. In fact,
You
some
know,
of
as somebody who teaches public speaking, and I keep telling my students, low voice is really important for authority. And Vysotsky had a growly voice. I mean, he was just like gurgling with scotch, and I think that was part of it, but that's details.
Yes, and this is what his voice, the closest American analog would be Tom Waits, who is also a phenomenal storyteller and a poet, creating very interesting characters. But in where I think the big, well, the two biggest differences between Tom Waits and Vladimir Vysotsky was that Tom Waits was always a niche performer, a niche artist. He has a cult following, very devoted fans, but he was not. He was almost a little bit too smart for the average American. Um, while Vysotsky was for everybody. This is where I think Johnny Cash is actually a much better comparison. Johnny Cash was and still is beloved on every level in every segment of American society, from bums in the streets to the presidents, from academics to coal miners. Same thing with Vysotsky. He was beloved on every level. So I think that Johnny Cash is actually, if even in his heyday, Johnny Cash's popularity does not quite match that of Vysotsky. I think a bit simply from the status um, level, I think a more apt comparison would be Elvis, who was a god in his heyday, same as Vysotsky. But the fact that Vysotsky was an actor and just told very convincing stories. The second difference between Tom Waits and Vysotsky is that Tom Waits was pretty much always very ironic, sarcastic in his works. There was never this element of larger than life hero that Vysotsky projected. Um, People wanted to associate themselves with Vysotsky and with his characters, much more so, I believe, than with Tom Waits's works. And the first song that I mentioned, the one who was with her before, has one very particular moment when a man is being cornered by a gang, by this ex-boyfriend of his girlfriend, and it's him and his friend versus 8 attackers. And he says in Russian, "Держитесь, гады." So, which I translate
Hang
as,
on. How did you translate it?
I hold on, you bastards.
I would say, hang on, you bastards. By the way, you're the poet.
Uh,
Go ahead.
and essentially, this is something that every man, I believe, wants to say at least once in his life. Um, hold on, you bastards, I'll get you. And Vysotsky was very strongly influenced by American, or well, I mean, he was influenced, but he's very relevant and relatable to this man's culture of classical American literature, from Jack London to Ernest Hemingway. Like a real man who can stand up for himself, for things that he believes, that he projects strength, and at the same time, a certain nobility of character.
And that's impressive because he has so many characters. And there's a failed boxer, and then there's like no, people from villages that don't know anything, and somebody who's going to city to shop for everybody, and then he's so afraid of the city that he ends up eating his list of notes of 8 pages, and then it becomes this really funny list of mishaps of what happened. I mean, and yet he is perceived as like the god man, of cult. Like that's the character that ended up being associated with him, not his humorous characters, not his sarcastic characters, but the battle, the warrior, the soldier.
Yes, because it's just, I mean, it's kind of flattering to oneself to think, to associate yourself with something like that.
Do you think that there was a political statement in Soviet Union that one could make by saying that he or she was a fan of Vysotsky because that was something that was anti-government, or that was individualism representation, or something like that? Or do you think it was just like, oh, I love great culture?
Well, Vysotsky was not an open dissident
Correct. So it was kind of safe to support him.
in the
But
sense
he lived
that,
a life that was not a Soviet life. His second wife was a French movie star. I mean, the guy died a third. Oh, thank you. Well, okay. And he died from, I think, what, cocaine overdose,
oh no, no, no,
morphine, something like that. Or
no.
are we gonna? Or can you clarify his situation of his death? Because I
Uh,
thought that he was trying to get over alcoholism by taking drugs, and the overdose killed him. I don't remember specifically which drug.
well, there are certain. I mean,
That's not a Soviet approach. I mean, in Soviet Union, it's just alcohol. That's it.
well, I mean, listen, you kind
Maybe
of
glue.
tapped on several equally important topics. I'll try to let's unpack them one by one. So Vysotsky was not an open dissident like Alexander Galich or Alexander Solzhenitsyn or whoever. He was an extremely popular actor. That was his day job, or evening job, if you will. And he did not, I mean, he towed the line of dissidence, but he never stepped over it. He was, after tremendous hassle, he was allowed to travel internationally because he did marry a superstar French actress, which is a fairy tale story. I mean, Cinderella ain't got nothing on this guy. Marina Vladi was one of the top 3 French actresses in the 60s, and for her to marry a relatively unknown Soviet actor was phenomenal, fantastic, completely unrealistic. And that allowed him to travel abroad eventually. So he was not an open dissident, but his work was as non-Soviet as it gets. His works, his characters are very individualistic, even though he uses the word we a lot. But usually when he says we, it actually probably, more often than not, it's sarcastic. When he says I, that is usually more honest.
But
More
I think he was trying to kind of walk both
personal.
sides, and he was trying to
But his
remain. Yeah, go ahead.
most famous works all pertain to the notion of freedom, of going against the grain, of of defiance. I usually describe them as the songs of defiance. The top five most famous ones are a airplane defying the pilot, a racehorse defying a jockey, uh, a high jumper defying a coach, a microphone defying a singer, and the most famous of all, a wolf defying a hunter. They're all about trying to do things your own way, trying to resist this total pressure upon you, and escaping and making the jump to freedom.
So the
Which and this
power
notion
and
was so
influence of an individual.
this notion was so anti-Soviet. He didn't have to speak against this stifling Soviet society. He sang against. He sang for freedom, and that was by definition anti-Soviet, and everybody understood it. This is why Soviet authorities couldn't really put their finger on what makes Vysotsky so uncomfortable for them. They went out of their way to make his life miserable, and which in fact contributed heavily to his self-destructive lifestyle, and it was very, very self-destructive. He was not allowed to publish his movie deals, where his movie roles were canceled at the last moment. His songs for soundtracks were scratched at the last moment.
There was at least one movie
Was
that
not
I remember
allowed.
seeing as a kid. It was a black and white movie, which was really rare in 1980s in Soviet Union by then. But it was one of the old Vysotsky's movies that was shelved until Perestroika, and then they released the movie. So yeah.
Yeah, exactly. His movies were shelved. Every time he went abroad, he had to jump through a whole lot of hoops, and ultimately, they were not releasing his music officially. A person who wrote over 600 songs saw one tiny 4-song EP, which was, of course, very upsetting to him. All the stuff upset him very, very much. But at the same time, and he dealt with it, unfortunately, a way that many depressed people do, via alcohol. And it's also been speculated, but that he was bipolar. But of course, at that time, nobody diagnosed it like that. But
Not that Russians would ever go to a psychiatrist on their own
yeah,
anyway.
modern psychiatrists kind of make that inference. It also, parallel to him being extremely unhappy professionally, he was also very he was also he lived an extremely intense lifestyle. He hardly ever slept, because his work days were full of work in theater and in cinema, and at night he would write songs. Sometimes when he would go on tours, quote unquote, he would play sometimes up to five concerts a day. He'll like he would come to town, and they would say, you're playing at 11 o'clock here, at 2 o'clock here, at 5 o'clock there, at 9 o'clock here, and then at night there will be a banquet where he would play some more. He literally burned a candle from both ends. He burned out. He, in his 42 years of life, he lived several lifetimes worth of work. And again, that the more intense he was, obviously, the harder toll it took on him, and it just basically it was a vicious circle. In his last bid to overcome his alcohol dependency, he tried opiates, which, believe it or not, as weird as it sounds today, it was actually a theory in the 70s that you can it was one of the drugs that would help alcohol dependency. And he tried it, and of course, as we all know, the dangers of opiates, it basically did not it did not substitute the problem. It simply added to it. And yes, he was dry for a few times, and he tried several times. very unfortunately unsuccessfully. But essentially, I think what killed him was it was a heart attack. That it's not what was the immediate cause of death, but essentially what killed him was how intense he was and how energetic and self-burning was his lifestyle. Started burns twice as bright, burns half as long.
Vadim, it's interesting because as you were talking about this, I started to remembering, that's one of the wonderful things about talking about Vysotsky is that I started to remembering my youth and his part in it, which was huge. And I remember where I was when I found out that, like my dad told me, or dad found out, and we were like, where we were at the time when Vysotsky died, and it was became known that he died in 1980. I believe he was 44 years old. Do
42.
42. Thank you. Um, yeah, we were in Crimea. The one time I was in Sevastopol visiting family, and I was 5, and we were in line to like an aquarium, and the word came through the line that Vysotsky died, and everyone was like, "What?" I mean, do you remember where you were?
Well, I was 4 years old, so
Fine. All right, you get a pass. Okay.
I did not even know Vysotsky's name at that time. I only learned of him basically after his death, and his music was always playing in my house. My father was and still is a big fan. People currently say that what if
My
there
dad was
was
as well.
another doctor present at the scene. There was one guy who tried. His credentials have been questioned by historians, but ultimately, I believe it wouldn't make the slightest difference. Had another doctor been able to save him, he would have died a month later or a year later. Remember, this was already his third clinical death. He died first time in 1970, I believe, and that's when his wife Marina Vladi saved him. She took him to a hospital, yelled at the paramedics, threatened to have an international scandal, and um, they budged and revived him. Then in 1979, he had another heart attack and a clinical death in Central Asia. I believe that moment was reflected in the film Vysotsky from 2011. And this was already his third. So if it didn't happen then, it would have happened sooner or later, sooner rather than later. A month later, a year later. Of course, it's a bloody shame that he was gone as early as he did, because there was so much more that he could give. Probably not so much in the songwriting department, because I believe he kind of already sort of exhausted himself as a songwriter. I think he would have moved on to prose or movie directing. He was an extremely versatile man. He always wanted to try new things. He was always very interested in theater and cinema. There is another theory, um, speculation, if you will, that he was at that time actively interested in the idea of immigration, and that in fact it was the KGB that did him in. Again, I think that, first, there are no real proof of that. Is it out of the realm of possible? Probably not. I certainly wouldn't put it past the KGB to murder a icon of Soviet culture if they realized that he would threaten immigration, because that would be a terrible blow to
For a country that operates on propaganda,
yeah,
that's powered by propaganda, that would be
exactly.
terrible, right?
So, but at the same time, I would rather not invent new essences here. What happened, and it's sad. But his blood is still
Unlike the case of Alexei Navalny, we did not have the flight plans of all the
oh,
KGB killers, so we could match things up.
and the guy is
Because the
fortunate. That man's luck is really really strong. But and from what I hear, Gotta give credit to his wife as well. She did.
We're talking about Navalny now, right?
Navalny, yes.
Yes.
Well,
Okay.
I mean, Vysotsky's wife, all the credit in the world, obviously.
Right. There was actually even a story I remember with Marina Vladi and Vysotsky where they were driving somewhere and like the car stopped working, like the brakes were disconnected and they like barely survived that. So he had his plenty share of excitement and it's.
Oh yeah, he lived his life on the edge. He was Russia's original rock star, larger than life in every sense of the word, even though he was fairly short.
Is there a song that you could possibly perform for us, or should we just go to the website?
I actually happen to have a guitar here.
Yes.
See, I think
It doesn't have to be a 7-string guitar like what Vysotsky used, and it
No, I
doesn't
did
have to
not.
be out of tune like many of his guitars. But go ahead.
Let's see. I haven't actually performed using this laptop yet. Let's see how is.
It sounds great.
Does it? Can you hear me?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Okay. I will sing his signature number called Wolf Hunt. Охота на волков. Pulling out, I'm tearing tendons. But today is just like yesterday. I'm surrounded. I have been hemmed in. I'm a predator turned into prey. In the shadows, shotguns are thumping. Hunters hiding behind the trees. On the snow, wolves rolling and jumping. Living targets, nowhere to flee. The hunt is on, the hunt is on, the hunt is on now. Mature predators and cubs are being mowed. The humans scream and the slobbering hounds howl. The flags fly crimson over crimson snow. No mercy, no fairness shown. Hands are steady as both actions clank. By the red flags, our freedom is sown. They're firing rounds point blank. But we wolves can't break with tradition. Must have been our childhood blind. With a mother's milk, we've been conditioned. Don't cross the flag line. The hunt is on, the hunt is on, the hunt is on now. Mature specimens and cubs are being mowed. The humans scream and the slobbering hounds howl. The flags fly crimson over crimson snow. Someone tell me, what are we doing? Tell us, Alpha, can't we rebel? Why are we dashing towards our ruin and not trying to break this corral? Not the wolf, he cannot, he must not. And my time is now almost done. As the one who is now my master dreams with pleasure and raises his gun. The hunt is on, the hunt is on, the hunt is on now. Mature specimens and cubs are being mowed. The humans scream and the slobbering hounds howl. The flags fly crimson over crimson snow. I transgress. I stop following orders. Lust for life drives me over the lines. I hear gleefully behind the borders, shouting men left without their prize. Pulling out, I'm tearing tendons. But today is not like yesterday. I'm surrounded, but I will not surrender. Empty-handed, the men go away. The hunt is on, the hunt is on, the hunt is on now. Mature specimens and cubs are being mowed. The kids are screaming, the silence howl. The flags fly crimson, the flags fly crimson, the flags fly crimson over crimson snow.
Woo!
Спасибо. Thank you very much. This was kind of an improv. I did not expect I'd be playing here.
I just kind of thought, well, why not? This makes so much sense. And you know, the quality of sound was very authentic Vysotsky, because so many of his recordings are just not perfect sound wise at all. And the
It's
fact that, you know, but you had that energy, man, that was awesome. Thank
Thank
you.
you. If you want to check out my website, please do. My it is www.vvinenglish.com. VV as in Vladimir Vysotsky, in English.com. One word, vvinenglish.com. You can buy CDs there. You can download music. There are music videos there, and
Does,
that.
does your throat hurt now?
No, not from one song.
Awesome.
But
But
it is actually singing him is a challenge. This is why I don't mind. Obviously, it would be hypocritical of me if I did, but I don't mind when people sing Vysotsky. Some of his diehard fans, they're very much opposed. But I believe that the song only lives until it's sang. So it's sung. So if people stop singing a song, it just kind of fades away. So I think it's good that people still sing Vysotsky. It's hard to find a Russian company with a guitar where there is a guitar with somebody not performing Vysotsky. But I always prefer when people sing him well. They sing him with energy, with passion, and hopefully with some degree of artistry that the original possessed in spades.
you know, I do want to ask you one more question, because as I'm thinking about this, there's a little thought that I have on and off. It seems to me that one of the ways that Vysotsky was a rebel, and one of the ways that so much of pop music we hear today, especially in Russia, is not like Vysotsky at all. It's like he had no influence in a way. Um, it's that there's a certain masculinity and strength and individual, you know, in his voice, that the voices now are more like high pitched and feminine. Not that there's anything wrong with it, but stylistically it doesn't convey the same energy. And I wonder if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, remember, Vysotsky stood alone even in his heyday. I mean, the Soviet estrada, so the Soviet official pop music, was also pretty insipid and pretty lame, if you ask me. If
And
Soviet,
very much in terms of topics that they chose, because they
yeah,
chose
and
to
it
sing
hasn't
about,
really changed all that much.
yeah, they, well,
It
I
just became
don't listen.
it just became more sexualized because that's kind of allowed. But ultimately, I don't think the pop music changed all that much in the Soviet in Russia, certainly since the 60s. And I mean, listen, Vysotsky was a genius performer and a genius, not just a genius songwriter. And you know, geniuses don't come around very often. So he did influence a massive scene of so-called Russian rock. Even though originally they shunned all Soviet music and only sought inspiration in the West from the Beatles and the Doors on. But as they kind of matured in the 80s, they've learned to appreciate the genius of Vysotsky, and then became influenced somewhat. People like Konstantin Kichev of Alisa, of Yuri Shevchuk of DDT, and many others, they've grown to become fans of Vysotsky, and he did influence them quite a bit.
But all of those two people that you mentioned have, again, lower growler screamer voices, not the you know, it's the lower pitch. Is there's I don't know. I'll have to think on this. Maybe we'll continue this conversation on
Well,
on the
Valery
range of
is a
vocals.
very big range, from
Right,
very low to very high.
right. Vadim, this was a pleasure, and I very much appreciate you performing for us. And I hope that this program managed to open some eyes and some ears for people who maybe are looking for maybe somebody new to listen to. Vladimir Vysotsky was an incredible performer, and thanks to my guest, Vadim Astrakhan, he's making not just a comeback, but he's making an appearance and rebirth here in the English-speaking world, and I think it's amazing. So thank you so much for your work.
My pleasure. Good luck.
Thank you. you.
Thank you.
You're watching Rashkin Report.